Now this is a pretty bog standard family hatchback. This is a Honda Civic. It's actually one in a long line of Honda Civics that I've owned over the years. And when I've come to change my car, I've just bought another fairly bog standard family hatchback. And that's been the same over the years because all of the cars kind of are the same. There hasn't been anything much to differentiate them. However, that's now changing. It's 2022 and so I'm looking to change this particular car, and when I'm changing a car I actually look for something fairly bog standard, not just the fact that it's got an engine and it gets me from A to B, but actually the most important thing for me is whether my dog cage is actually going to fit in the back of the vehicle, and that's about as exciting as it gets, frankly. But in 2022 things are a little bit different because the environment is becoming a big thing, as if it hasn't always been. And we're now looking at cars that aren't just petrol powered, but they have other power as well. You've definitely heard of hybrid, and I'm sure you've heard of EV. So the question now is, when I replace this vehicle, should I be getting another petrol gas guzzler? Should I be getting a hybrid? Or should I be going pure EV? Okay class, pay attention. Let's talk about hybrid and electric vehicles. So hybrid, first of all, this is a car, has a petrol engine, but also has an electric motor in it. And there are actually three different kinds of hybrid that you will quite often see advertised. First up, we have a mild hybrid. Now, a mild hybrid is a car with a petrol engine and it also has an electric motor. Now, the petrol engine will be driving the car, propelling the car all of the time, but the electric motor will be helping the car do some of its job. That means that you tend to get more miles per gallon and therefore, at least in theory, lower emissions. Driving the car and operating the car effectively is the same as a petrol and diesel car now. You put petrol in it and you drive it. You probably won't even notice that there is an electric motor in there at all. Next up, we have the hybrid, the kind of normal hybrid, the Prius, if you like, from years ago. Lots of hybrids will be like this. These are also often referred to as self-charging hybrids. And these have a petrol engine, they have an electric motor, and they have a small battery. And what happens here is the car can run on petrol as a kind of mild hybrid, but it can also run purely on the electric motor. And it tends to do that when you're perhaps driving the car slowly, perhaps you're cruising around looking for a car parking space or dropping the kids off at school, that kind of thing. Quite good really to not be spewing out those emissions when you're just cruising around where there might be lots of people about. Finally, we have the PHEV, the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. And this is the love child of a pure EV and your old-fashioned petrol car. It can run as a mild hybrid and a hybrid, but these cars also have a charging port on them, so you can plug them in at home or at a destination charger and charge them up like you would an EV. You could, at least in theory, drive this car purely on the battery and not run the petrol engine at all, although they tend to have quite a modest range, maybe 30 miles or so. But that might be enough to get you down to the shops and back, in which case you could go all the way there, all the way home, and not run the petrol engine at all. Now the thing is, of course, that plug-in hybrid electric vehicles are the most expensive. You're effectively buying two cars in one, but they're very popular with fleet customers. As for the normal hybrid, well, that's the one that's being pushed a lot by manufacturers. It's the car of choice for a lot of people who may not be able to install a charger at home. The mild hybrid is kind of one being pushed at the petrol heads who really don't like the idea of an EV at all. Okay, that covers hybrid. Let's talk about the most exciting part, which is pure EVs, battery electric vehicles. Now, you might have heard of hydrogen fuel cell. Now, though it is a technology that just hasn't gone anywhere, hydrogen has all sorts of problems. I mean, you can't write it off completely, but it's not a solution that's going to be in place anytime soon. So we have battery electric vehicles. These are cars that have an electric motor and a battery. They have no tailpipe, they have zero emissions, they are the greenest form of transport at the moment for the consumer. And these cars kind of come in two flavours really. You have what you could call a derivative car. So these are cars where you have, they're built as petrol cars, as hybrid cars, and you also maybe get an EV version. Now the downside of these derivatives is that they tend to work to the lowest common denominator, which means that you may have less space inside because your chassis is built to take all the extra gubbins that comes with having a petrol engine. The best EVs are the ones that are built as electric cars from the ground up. Take VW's ID range, for example, pure electric cars. There are Teslas, of course. Lots of other cars are pure EVs from the ground up. These are the best EVs because they tend to have a lot more space. They haven't got the constraints of a petrol car. They might have a longer wheelbase, for example. All sorts of things going on there that make these cars quite different from a normal petrol car. So don't think that an EV is a car, petrol car that's had the petrol engine taken out and electric motor put in. Derivatives may be more so. A pure EV that's built as an EV from the ground up is a completely different type of car. I last changed my car in 2018. At the time of recording, that's just 4 years ago. And at the time, you'd walk into a new or second-hand car dealership and you would be presented with petrol and diesel cars. I mean, yes, there were hybrids, there were electrics on the market, but at the time, the default option, really, the main one, was a petrol or a diesel. Everything else was kind of on the periphery. Fast forward just 4 years to 2022, everything has changed beyond recognition. Now you walk into a dealership, and especially a new one, and you will find lots of hybrids and electrics on the market. In fact, I've got a Honda Civic at the moment. When I got it 4 years ago, petrol and diesels everywhere. You go into a Honda dealership now, every single model that they do is a hybrid, with the exception of the rather funky looking Honda E, which is their electric vehicle. And that's the case in lots of dealerships all over the place from every manufacturer. In fact, some, of course, have gone a lot further. As we mentioned earlier, VW's ID range, a whole range of electric vehicles there, the ID3, 4, 5, and the really great looking camper van like ID Buzz, all built on a pure electric platform. And of course, they're far from being the only ones. Now, I have to be honest with you here, I have a slight problem with hybrid cars. I know, I'm going to get hate for it in the comments, but hear me out. Hybrid cars are, of course, a petrol car with an electric motor in there. Now, petrol cars are complicated enough. There's a lot of stuff in a petrol car. You go shoving in an electric motor and a load of other gubbins as well, and you're just adding to this complexity. There's more stuff to go wrong, and it's expensive when it does. An electric car, on the other hand, is completely the other way. There's a lot less stuff in an electric car. The other main problem with hybrids is that despite the impression that they give of being a green technology, and well, yes, they are greener than a petrol and a diesel, they're still giving out tailpipe emissions. They're still polluting the atmosphere, and we're still breathing in noxious fumes. No, thank you very much. So I do have a problem with hybrids, but don't get me wrong, they are better than just having a petrol or a diesel. So I decided I needed to go out and just kind of see whether I was right about hybrids. So I thought, best thing to do, take a couple for a test drive. So I went out in a Honda HR-V hybrid and also a Hyundai Tucson hybrid. And to cut a long story short, neither of those cars convinced me that I was wrong about a hybrid. I'm sorry, they're nice enough cars to drive, but no, I just realised, it confirmed for me that hybrid technology is not the way that I want to go. Might not surprise you to hear that perhaps. So I thought, well, now I've got to do is to go out in an electric car. And at this point, I had never driven an electric car. In fact, I'd never even been in one as a passenger. So I went back to Hyundai and took out their Ioniq 5, the first ever electric car I even went in, and I also, of course, drove it. And within moments of setting off in this car, I knew that this is the way motoring should be. It was just an obvious moment, but a revelation all the same. I loved it. It's so spacious. You have instant torque, which means when you put your foot on the accelerator, it gives you all the power that you're going to get from that car. You just don't get that in your standard petrol and diesel car, certainly not the ones that I could afford to buy anyway. It's just brilliant all the way around. Loved the space, loved everything about it. And I thought then I must go out and try some other ones. So I went out, took out a Volvo XC60 Recharge. Now this is a derivative. If you remember, these are cars that will be sold not only as electric but also as petrol and hybrid as well. So it wasn't that spacious and even had an empty transmission tunnel in it, I think. And also the weird infotainment system is sort of portrait screen, huge bezels and loads of menus and things. Wasn't that enamoured by that, but it did have Google Assistant, if you like that sort of thing, and of course it's really solidly built. Also took out a VW ID4. Love the ID4. Lovely comfortable seats, really spacious car, not quite as spacious as the Ioniq 5, but still lots of room in there. Really nice and pleasant to drive, lots of gadgets and gizmos. Now the ID4 has had some criticism of the infotainment system. I have to say I didn't see that many problems with it, and let's face it, it was way better than the Volvos. I also had a look at a range of other vehicles as well. Some I took out for test drives and some I didn't. For example, the Kia EV6. I love the look of that vehicle, lovely, but unfortunately my dog crate doesn't fit in the back. Sticking with Kia, who incidentally do a 7-year warranty on their electric vehicles, which is just brilliant. They've also got the e-Niro. The cage did fit in the back of the e-Niro, but they were discontinuing that car at the time and coming out with the Niro derivative that wasn't going to be available yet at the time I wanted to place my order. So unfortunately that was off the list. Of course, there's a ton of other cars that I could have looked at. Say the Skoda Enyaq, for example, is one. I haven't mentioned Tesla, have I? Now, I want to buy new, so for me, Tesla, the only one that's in the range, in my price range, is a Model 3. That's a saloon car. I'm never going to get the dog crate in the back of that, so that's kind of off the menu for me. But of course, Tesla, great range, some really clever battery technology going on in there, and of course the supercharger network is second to none. So at this stage I had a short list, pretty much the Ioniq 5 and the ID4, and my wife doesn't like the look of the Ioniq 5, and we share a car. And this is one of the reasons why we can actually go out and buy a nice new car. I'm not minted by any stretch of the imagination. I've not got pots of money, but the fact that we don't have to have more than one car in our household does make a big difference when you're buying a vehicle, because you can kind of spend a bit more on your monthly payments. So we can go out and kind of, you know, get a nice car. So, but we both need to like that vehicle. That's also very important. She doesn't like the Ioniq 5, so that's off the list. So you kind of think at this stage, it must be the ID4 then, we must go for that. There's a year's waiting list at the time, but you know, if that's the car we want. So we were going to do that. We'd arranged an appointment to go to the dealer and pick out colours and accessories and all that gubbins. And then we went along just kind of for something to do as much as anything. Yeah, we know how to live. To a launch event for Nissan's new car. I haven't mentioned Nissan much, have we? The Nissan Leaf, one of the longest running electric vehicles that's out on the market, and yet they've taken a long time to come up with their difficult second album. But their new car is called the Nissan Ariya, and my wife and I went along to the launch event for that car. Now, I was convinced that the famous dog crate was not going to fit in the back of that car. So I kind of discounted it. We just went along to have a few free nibbles and to look around the nice fancy car. Now, I'd had a word with the dealer before we went to say, can I try the dog crate in the back? It's not going to fit, but can I try it anyway? He laughed and said, it will fit, and yes, sure, bring it along. Anyway, after the event and most people had finished looking around the car, we tried the dog crate in the back, and lo and behold, it actually fitted. In fact, you've got a kind of floating floor in the back of the Nissan Ariya where you can put stuff underneath. I thought it might, if it was going to fit at all, it would only fit perhaps if you took that shelf out, but no, it fits even if you keep that shelf in there, it still fits. There's still plenty of room in the back of that car for the crate. So suddenly everything had changed. And we went home, we thought about it for a bit, thought, well, we did like the ID4, but we really like the Ariya, it's a little bit more expensive. What are we going to do? Long story short, we have decided to go for the Nissan Ariya. Now, all of this happened quite some time ago, and we put the order in. There was, of course, a long delay for all orders of any new vehicles at the moment, so don't we all know it? But the car, at the time of recording this in November 2022, has been built, and in fact, as of this week, it is on board a ship heading for the UK. I'm supposed to have it sort of middle to end of December. That's the latest guess. It might fall into the new year, who knows, but it's very soon at the time of recording. So on this channel, I will be running, of course, I'll be doing my running videos as normal, don't you worry about that. But there will also be some interesting EV content as a new EV owner, somebody who's never even owned a hybrid before, or jumping straight into EV. It's the future, without a doubt, but there are probably going to be hurdles to overcome, particularly with charging and all that kind of stuff. So I will be making videos about the car, about charging, about home charging, just generally about all the sort of things related to getting an electric vehicle. So I hope that you will enjoy that content. Do subscribe if you're new here and you want to see it. Hit like if you've enjoyed this video, and I'd love to hear your comments about the whole EV thing and the transition to electric, because it's such an interesting subject. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you for another video really soon.